It's time, though, for a look at what's been making headlines in the international press. And for that, I'm joined on set to my left by Diptyque Laurent and Dipty. The Australian press is reacting to the fallout between Malcolm Turnbull and the US president.
That's right. Sean Spicer, the White House press secretary, said late on Thursday that the U.S. will indeed honor this refugee deal that's really been at the center of this dispute between the U.S. and Australia. This after Donald Trump called it dumb on Twitter and he hung up on Turnbull. Adding insult to injury, though, Spicer, the Sydney Morning Herald reports that Spicer appeared to mispronounce the Australian Prime Minister's surname during that announcement on Thursday. Apparently, he called him Trunbull or Trumbull. So, again, oil being poured onto the fire.
It's very awkward. And that diplomatic faux pas is still making news on the front pages in Australia.
Well, let's look at the Daily Telegraph, Thomas. Donald Thump, that's what the paper says on its front page, saying Trump has essentially thrown the U.S. alliance into disarray. The Australian says allies are in a war of words. And the paper has penned an opinion piece saying, well, Australia has clashed with the U.S. in the past. For instance, Prime Minister John Curtin disagreed with Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill during the Second World War. But we've really reached the bottom of the barrel here. We've reached uncharted territory. Tony Brampston, the columnist for The Australian, says never before has an Australian Prime Minister been disrespected. And while this is not Turnbull's fault, it is now his problem.
OK, from Australia to Europe now, and the British paper The Guardian is reporting that Trump's choice of EU ambassador is also causing friction with Europe. Did you tell us more?
Well, that choice is Ted Malloch, and he's tipped to be the U.S. ambassador to the EU, but he's also been making some comments denigrating the EU. First of all, he took aim at Jean-Claude Juncker, the EU president, and recently he said, I quote, I had in a previous career a diplomatic post where I helped bring down the Soviet Union, so maybe there's another union that needs a little taming. So not surprisingly, conservatives and liberal groups in Europe are now calling on the EU to boycott or at least veto this appointment if it does happen.
OK, let's move on to some French politics now. And The Guardian's Paris correspondent has penned an article about that now infamous interview with Penelope Fillon that was broadcast on French TV last night.
Kim Wilshire is the Paris correspondent for The Guardian, and she's penned an article saying, well, it was a seemingly inoffensive interview in 2007, one that has essentially become a smoking gun in this whole scandal, Penelope Gate. Basically, the interview was dug up by somebody in the wake of the alleged fake job scandal. And now in the interview, Penelope Fillon says she never worked as her husband's assistant. This despite Fillon saying his wife was paid nearly €1 million over the course of several years to do just that, to be his assistant.
OK, let's move on, staying with Europe to Romania. And thousands there, tens of thousands even, have taken to the streets for a third consecutive night of protests.
Well, Thomas, we haven't seen this kind of protesting in Romania since 1989 when the communist regime was brought down. Romanians are furious essentially over the Prime Minister's refusal to repeal decrees that critics say will allow corrupt officials to get out of jail early or shield others from conviction. Well, tens of thousands of Romanians have been protesting in the streets over the last 3 nights. And in the press, we're seeing a lot of support for them from this Romanian website, Hot News, that hails the citizen movement, saying, what you have done so far is great. It was the largest and most beautiful protest, but it's not enough. We have not yet won. And we're seeing this sort of opinion in the Romanian press, encouraging the supporters to continue their movement, continue until the government backs down.
OK, and finally, it's Super Bowl week this Sunday. As we were saying with Delano, a sacred football tradition in the US, and one of the big highlights, if you're not really into the game, is, of course, the halftime show.
The halftime show that, as Delano mentioned, is watched by over 100 million people. And Lady Gaga is headlining that halftime show this year. And she's staying pretty tight-lipped about what her plans are. Will she use the show to make some sort of political statement about immigration or women's rights or LGBTQ rights?
She's, of course, very anti-Trump.
Obviously, she's very anti-Trump, and she's also a great defender of LGBTQ rights. So many are wondering what she's going to use. Is she's going to use the halftime show as her own personal pulpit? Well, and not obviously not forgetting that this is a singer who once turned up to a ceremony in a dress made entirely of meat.
Indeed.
Well,
Thumbs like that.
we've been seeing a lot of slideshows about some of the some of the more memorable halftime shows. Who can forget, for instance, Janet Jackson's Nipplegate uproar, not to be confused with Penelope Gate, obviously, or Katy Perry's show in which she was upstaged by an awkwardly dancing shark. I think it's the one to her left, so it's the one to our right. Anyway, Lady Gaga has toned down her theatrics in recent years, so many are curious about what kind of show she'll be putting on.
Have to wait and see on Sunday, Dipti. Thank you
That's
very
right.
much for that spin through the international press this hour.